Yama, I'm Jack Evans and you're watching BTN. Here's what's coming up. We learn about the world's most famous shipwreck. Find out why Australia's native species need protection. And go to the show with some ag students. But first today, we're going to find out what's happening in Afghanistan, where there have been a series of powerful earthquakes. Justina found out how it's impacted people there and spoke to some Afghan kids living here in Australia.
We are brothers and his name is Mohid and I'm Tawid.
Mohid and Tawid are from Afghanistan and they moved to Australia 2 years ago.
The thing that I missed in Afghanistan was we had a 2-story house and a balcony and I really loved it. And every day I would go up there and see the mountains.
And they say living far away from their country can be tough, especially during a time like this.
You feel sad when you move to another house, and it feels good that we're away from the earthquake and there's no trouble in Australia right now.
See, on Sunday the 31st of August, an earthquake struck eastern Afghanistan, about 27 kilometres from the city of Jalalabad, Afghanistan's 5th largest city.
It was midnight when the earthquake started and shook us all violently, even breaking our house.
We have never witnessed such an earthquake in history.
Thousands of people have died, and many more have been injured. Since then, multiple aftershocks have been felt across the region.
The number of injuries is increasing, so we can't give an exact number. Our department has delivered dozens of tons of food and other supplies to the disaster area.
Earthquakes in Afghanistan are pretty common, especially near the Hindu Kush mountain range, where the Indian and Eurasian tectonic plates meet.
The thing is that the areas that the earthquakes happen is like mountain areas, and so that's kind of why it happens.
Fatima and Moharasa also moved over from Afghanistan 2 years ago and have first-hand experience of earthquakes.
I think we were sitting in our room and then it kind of started shaking, and then some things like fell off, like some toys and stuff. Yeah. We were a little younger. So, and like we kind of ran to our mom and my mom was like, "Don't worry, it's just an earthquake." But it was still a little scary.
This earthquake was a magnitude 6, and because of where it hit, authorities say it's the most deadly disaster Afghanistan has seen in years. It's also come at a time when the country is already facing huge problems. Millions of people don't have enough food or access to healthcare and education, which is why people like Mohid's family left the country.
We moved to Australia because my dad was an interpreter and we were not feeling safe because the Taliban had a list of interpreters to hunt down.
The Taliban is the group that now governs Afghanistan. They enforce a strict interpretation of Islamic law and limit the rights of women and girls.
It's not safe there, and girls are not allowed to have any education and they can't work, so it's not a really good future.
And since they took control of the country in 2021, trade and international aid from other countries have been cut back a lot. Now the Taliban is calling for international help. So far, a number of countries, including China, India, the UK and Australia, have said they'll do what they can to help. And teams on the ground are trying to provide things like food, water and shelter.
Some people are helping each other for them to survive.
I'm very sad that I'm not there with my relative, with my family. I really want to be there, help them, but I can't. But what I can now is to try to empathy with them and share their story to get help for them.
Can you spot the former Australian State Premier in this photo? Here he is, it's former Victorian Premier Dan Andrews. He was photographed amongst a whole heap of world leaders who were in China last week for a meeting of a security and trade group, along with a huge military parade. Mr. Andrews, who now works for private companies, said the event was a chance to meet leaders and build relationships. But some criticised his decision to pose alongside the likes of Russian President Vladimir Putin. An Italian teenager named Carlo Acutis has been officially named as a saint by the Catholic Church. Do you know what that process is called? Is it sanctification, canonization, or beatification? It's called canonization, and it's reserved for people who have died and who, according to the Church, have performed miracles. What astronomical event was visible around the world on Monday? Was it a solar eclipse, a lunar eclipse, or an aurora? It was a lunar eclipse. That happens when the Earth moves between the Sun and the Moon, throwing its shadow on the lunar surface.
You experience, you witness, that's the best thing.
The red colour comes from light bending around the Earth and reflecting onto the Moon. Can you name this Australian-made video game that was so popular that it crashed several online game stores when it was released last week? It's Hollow Knight Silksong. It's the sequel to the first Hollow Knight game, which sold more than 15 million copies and was made by a small team of developers in Adelaide. Now we're going to Beijing, which has been right at the centre of the news this week. As you just heard, it hosted a big meeting of world leaders and a really, really big military parade. Here's Josh to tell us why it was such a big deal.
Marching, music, and a whole lot of military. Safe to say it was a big day for Beijing as China marked the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II with a victory parade, the country's largest ever, and a guest list that's got a lot of people around the world talking. Chinese leader Xi Jinping was joined by Russian leader Vladimir Putin and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. It's the first time they've all been seen meeting together in public, and it made headlines around the world. Why? Well, for starters, these are controversial figures. President Vladimir Putin has been accused of war crimes and criticized by world leaders for leading the invasion of Ukraine. And Kim Jong-un is the dictator of a country that's cut off from the rest of the world and known to be working on nuclear weapons. Then there's the fact that these three countries, Russia, China and North Korea, aren't exactly besties with the US, or at least they haven't been in the past. While the US president himself didn't get an invite.
President Xi's a friend of mine, but I thought that the United States should have been mentioned last night during that speech because we helped China.
It got some wondering if this was meant to send a signal that the world has a new superpower. Since the Second World War, that's a title that's been claimed by the USA. It has the world's biggest economy, its currency is used for international trade, and it has a powerful military which it's used to help shape world politics. China, on the other hand, was left battered by World War II, and then a civil war, which led to the creation of the Communist People's Republic of China. There were periods of famine, and the country was cut off from the rest of the world. But eventually that started to change. China started trading with other countries, and while its people still don't have the same political freedoms as in some other countries, millions have been lifted out of poverty. China now has the world's second biggest economy and its second biggest population. It also has more soldiers than any other country, and the second highest military budget in the world after the US. Which brings us back here. To many, this parade was designed to show off Chinese military power to the world and to challenge the US. Some reckon China is using its power to try to influence other countries, not just with its military, but by giving out aid, building infrastructure, and building friendships. Meanwhile, the US president has upset some allies and potential allies by cutting aid, putting taxes on imports from other countries, and making some controversial comments.
If I weren't around, you'd have right now 6 major wars going on. India would be fighting with Pakistan.
It's got a lot of people wondering what will happen next, and what it'll mean for the world, as we watch the power play between these superpowers.
Over the weekend, we marked the anniversary of the death of this guy, the world's last Thylacine. He became a symbol of what can happen if we don't look after our native plants and animals. Let's find out what's being done to help some of them.
This is the Gang cockatoo, one of Canberra's most famous feathered friends.
They are an iconic species. They look different to our regular cockatoos. They have this amazing, beautiful, distinctive call.
Many birders come to Canberra basically to have a look for the gang.
But spotting one is getting more difficult. Experts say that over time, the gang population has decreased by about 69%, thanks partly to the massive bushfires of 2020.
We anticipate that was quite devastating on their habitat and through direct mortality. We detected just over 50 gang cockatoos. That's not to say there are only 50 in Canberra, but I would be very surprised if there were many more than 100.
It's why the gang cockatoo has been added to the threatened species list, which includes more than 2,000 native plants and animals that are considered at risk of being lost because of things like habitat loss, disease, feral predators, pollution and climate change. It includes animals like the Pugh's frog from northern New South Wales, the ringed thin-tailed gecko from Queensland, and the pig-nosed turtle from the Northern Territory and southern New Guinea, all of which were added in the last 12 months. The list is a way of recognising animals and plants that need our help, so we don't lose them for good. Because since colonisation, more than 100 plants and animals have become extinct, including this one.
The Tasmanian tiger, easily distinguished by his straight, unjointed tail. This is the only one in captivity in the world.
The Tasmanian tiger, or Thylacine, were carnivorous marsupials that once roamed all of Australia and Papua New Guinea. But by the 19th century, they were only found in Tasmania, hence the name. At the time, they were seen as a bit of a pest, and early European farmers blamed them for killing sheep, even though they were probably too small. Either way, the government paid people to kill them. By the 1930s, they were extinct in the wild, and on the 7th of September 1936, this lonely Thylacine died in a Hobart zoo. Today, we mark that date with National Threatened Species Day, as a reminder of what we've lost and a call to protect the species that are still here. Right around the country, conservationists, government organisations, and citizen scientists are working to protect threatened species and their habitats, including here in Canberra, where researchers have been taking count of gang populations.
It's only been in the last several years that citizen scientists have really been paving the way in terms of monitoring the breeding here in Canberra. And in the last couple of years, ACT Government and the Difficult Bird Research Group, which I'm a part of at ANU, have been collaboratively working with these guys on the ground.
It's hoped that by collecting all this information, more will be done to protect the gang cockatoo, so this beloved beaked buddy can continue to thrive for many years to come. Do you or your classmates have something you're passionate about? Maybe it's making something, lending a hand, or saving the planet. Whatever it is, we want to hear about it. Send us a letter or a video telling us about your passion project, and we'll choose the best to turn into stories to share with kids around Australia. Head to our website to find out the details.
This month marks 40 years since a team of deep-sea explorers found what was left of the Titanic. Jen found out why that was a big moment and why the ship still fascinates so many people.
It's a boiler! It's like a boiler! Yes, yes. Fantastic! All right!
After 73 years in darkness, lying on the ocean floor, there she was.
Holy smokes, look at that.
Almost 4 kilometres below the surface of the North Atlantic Ocean, 600 kilometres off the coast of Newfoundland, what was left of the world's most famous and infamous ship, the Titanic.
To understand the significance of this moment, you have to go back about 100 years or so, 1912 to be exact. That's better. This is the age of the Great Ocean Liner, where rival companies would compete to build the biggest, fastest and most luxurious steamship to ferry people between Europe and America.
The RMS Titanic was built by British shipping company White Star Line. It was one of 3 sister ships called the Olympic class, designed to be the safest and most luxurious ships ever. The Titanic took 3 years and more than 15,000 people to build. It was as tall as a 16-storey building and as long as 22 buses.
But what really set it apart was what was on the inside.
The Titanic had 4 elevators. Not bad for 1912. There were also squash courts and a gym, if that's your thing. You could also take a dip in a heated swimming pool. First-class passengers could even eat dinner while listening to a live orchestra before returning to their luxury suite. Carry on.
The Titanic was also described as unsinkable, with state-of-the-art safety features including 16 watertight compartments, which could be blocked off if the hull was broken and water got inside. Titanic set off on its maiden voyage on April 10, 1912, from Southampton in England to New York City in the US. 4 days into its 6-day journey, the boat entered an area known for drifting icebergs. Warnings were sent to the captain of the ship, Edward John Smith, who adjusted the ship's course but didn't slow down. And by the time the ship was facing the massive iceberg that would ultimately sink it, it was too late. Captain Smith tried to turn the boat, but the iceberg tore holes along the boat's hull, filling too many compartments with water for the boat to stay afloat. Titanic disappeared into the darkness of the North Atlantic Ocean, taking with it about 1,500 people. Several distress calls were sent to nearby ships, and the RMS Carpathia picked up 700 survivors from the water. The sinking of the Titanic became one of the most famous maritime disasters. It inspired books, poetry, songs, and movies.
Iceberg, dead ahead, sir!
But it wasn't until the 1980s that deep-sea exploration technology made finding the Titanic a real possibility. In 1985, oceanographer Robert Ballard was given that task. It was actually a cover for his more secret mission to search for 2 missing nuclear submarines. But for Ballard and his French teammate Jean-Louis Michel, finding the famous shipwreck was a dream. They used 2 experimental deep-sea vehicles called Argo and SAR, which mapped out the area with sonar and video. And just after 1 a.m. on September 1st, after a week of scanning the seafloor with no luck,
the first thing I saw coming out of the gloom at 30 feet was this wall. I never looked down at the Titanic. I looked up at the Titanic. Nothing was small.
Since then, the world's fascination with the Titanic has continued. There have been more stories told and more expeditions to the seafloor, as a whole new wave of fascination was born.
How many lifeboats were on the Titanic? 20, 64, or 100? There were only 20 lifeboats, even though the ship was equipped for 64. To make things worse, many boats were launched before they were full, and 2 didn't make it off the ship at all.
We're from Portland Central School and you're watching BTN! Woo!
Top of the world.
Carlos Alcaraz has returned to the world #1 spot after defeating Jannik Sinner 6-2, 3-6, 6-1, 6-4 to win the men's US Open final. But he's not the only world #1 to come out with a W this weekend.
Arina Sabalenka.
Yep, exactly. Arina Sabalenka claims victory in the women's final in straight sets against Amanda Anisimova 6-3, 7-6. Over in the AFL, the Gold Coast Suns played their first ever finals match. and secured their spot in the semi-finals. Taking on the Fremantle Dockers, it was a battle, and everything came down to this moment. Thought to be a goal, players prepared themselves for a big final push at centre bounce. But it was then found out to be touched on the mark, sending players back down to the goals and not giving Freo enough time to score. Finally to Monza for the Italian Grand Prix. Red Bull driver Max Verstappen came out on top.
Max Verstappen wins!
But a lot of the talk was actually about who placed second on the podium, after Aussie Oscar Piastri was asked to let his McLaren teammate Lando Norris overtake him after a slow pit stop for Norris.
He's let Lando pass.
While some fans were quite upset, Oscar said he understood the call.
The decision to swap back was fair. You know, Lando was ahead of me the whole race.
Finally today, we're going to the show. Adelaide's Royal Show has just wrapped up, and for many kids that meant rides and show bags. But Tatenda caught up with some students from an agricultural school who take show business pretty seriously. Check it out.
My name's Rose. I'm Kara. This is Akbar. Right now, our role is getting the heifers ready for the show.
For students at Albury High, show business is serious farm business.
The Adelaide show is a huge part of what we do here. Everything kind of leads up to it. It's a moment to showcase what we have to offer.
They spend months getting their animals competition ready.
We wash, we blow dry them, we teach them how to walk properly so they're calm at the show when there's lots of people around. So yeah, just really desensitising them and making them look their best.
We halter train them, so it's just working with putting the halters on, getting them used to being led around and getting them used to being able to stand how they have to when they're being judged.
After all that grooming and training, it's finally time to put their hard work to the test.
We're down here at the Royal Adelaide Show in the sheep shed. They're judging our sheep, trying to figure out which ones they think are the best. This is my sheep here. Bruce is definitely a winner. Is there any Bruce that isn't a winner?
At the show, the livestock are judged in separate groups. When it comes to the sheep, the judges decide which 3 are the best for wool or meat production. They also look for the best handlers, a category which Rose won in the dairy cattle events.
This is Spangle. She is our lovely little Illawarra heifer. I was lucky and I placed first with her in school handler.
Some of the students even get to be judges themselves.
You want them to have really long, sleek necks. Again, the ribs, very angular. Pin bones up here, you want them sitting up high because that means they'll carry an udder better.
Even though getting a ribbon is something a lot of students hope for, the judges say the events at the Royal Show aren't all about winning.
What we're seeing is these kids are coming in and they're enjoying it, and they're obviously telling their friends, and their friends want to do it, and it's really growing. So, as I said, if these kids can get involved in agriculture through a show and then find a career, well, that's our job done.
The ribbons are just a bonus. Just getting out there, just have fun.
And hey, having fun is a big part of what the show is all about.
My favourite part of the show is looking at the animals. They're all so cute and stinky, but they're so cute.
If you go out there, there's like tons of activity you can do.
Probably just getting to know a bunch of different people through agriculture.
And I also like showing the sheep and meeting new people.
Well, that's all we've got for you today, but we'll be back next week with more. In the meantime, you can check out more stories and specials and teacher resources online, along with episodes of BTN Newsbreak and BTN High. Have an awesome week, and I'll see you next time. Bye!